Hello, I'm Jacob Rideout. Today I'm going to be breaking down the sponsorship deal between the PHF and EA Sports. So, who's involved? It's an exclusive brand deal between EA and the PHF, Premier Hockey Federation, formerly known as the NWHL. The deal will include broadcasting, advertising, as well as player likeness rights between the two entities. So the exclusive brand deal will help both of them to experience growth within their current markets as well as into new markets. The video game and women's sport industry has been on such a rapid rise in recent time, and I believe now is the time for both of them to commit to this deal and experience the most amount of growth possible. The deal will give EA rights over PHF player likeness for in-game representation, as well as being labeled an official sponsor of the league. The greater exposure of women in sport, especially within video games that are predominantly played by men, will create a greater interest for the PHF and its players as a whole. The inclusion of women to a greater extent within EA Sports will allow them to show their commitment towards parity and equality between men's and women's sport. With the stance of women's right being so hot right now, as well as the matter of women's hockey being on such a rapid growth rate within North America, EA can use both factors to enhance their game and expand their market base to never before seen heights. By having players from the PHF within the game, they will become more commonly known and create a greater interest for fans to become engaged as well as excited about the PHF moving forward. A most important new feature will be EA Games access to streaming services for all PHF games during the season for just a small subscription fee. And this subscription fee essentially will just be there to cover costs for the streaming and broadcasting of these games, as well as the development of this streaming service within their game, and possibly bring in more revenue to them. The flip side of that is it will be able to allow a greater audience to watch PHF games, which of course will create more buzz and awareness about the PHF to help them grow their revenue. So where's the money being allocated? EA will be required under the deal to develop a new game mode, as well as include all PHF players within its new games for the duration of the contract. The deal will allow EA to be an official sponsor of the PHF and will include allocated resources towards marketing this new deal for the developments of their game. Essentially, what this means is EA should be proud to have this partnership between the PHF and themselves. And moving forward, it will allow them to grow at a rapid rate, especially into new markets. And in turn, PHF players, specifically their star players, will get paid sponsorships, promotions to be a part of EA's advertising and promotional campaigns for their new games. This will allow create a greater exposure for PHF players and their likeness. And by creating a greater exposure for them, it'll allow them to generate more buzz and interest around the league as a whole. When will happen? This deal will carry out a 3-year term from the initial signing, which essentially would be 2023 to 2026. This deal will give EA time to develop these new modes and arrange for payments towards development, broadcasting, and promotional activities. The 3 years will include 4 game titles: NHL 23, 24, 25, and 26. With the growth of both men's and women's sport being so rapid within recent, and with women's hockey, more specifically within video games, being such a hot topic, the short-term deal is the most logical one. So why EA and PHF? FIFA has recently cut ties with EA for their game development, leaving a massive hole in revenues to be filled for EA Sports. And EA has experienced a steady decline in NHL game purchases from NHL 15 to 20, with a slight increase in 21. The idea of this would be to bring EA back to its prime sales rate for its NHL games and create a greater revenue source for them. EA can also bolster their reputation with the inclusion of women within the game that is predominantly played by men. EA will also be able to generate an accelerated growth of viewers for the PHF's games through their subscription mode. By having women heavily advertised as part of their new games, EA can expand its markets towards women, which is a relatively new market for them, as well as those who feel the representation of women has been far too limited within their current games. And by having main stars of the league well represented in the game, as well as through promotions, it allows these players to become more well known and thus create opportunities for themselves to get other brand deals, which will help increase the presence of stardom within the league, overall creating a greater interest with the league as a whole. The video game industry has noticed a massive growth in the number of female participants in the past several years. By women being better represented in sports, it opens them up to that new market. Not only is female participation growing in the age demographic, but it is also dominated by a younger generation, with about 58% being under the age of 34. Sports have also predominantly been carried out an interest in younger generation. So by having the women that are younger also interested in sports games, it allows them to create a greater revenue source for this game, as well as allows the PHF to create a greater interest within their league. How will it be done? EA will be required to expend some of their budget towards the development of these new game modes, as well as broadcasting rights for the streaming services. EA would be expected to invest towards promotional campaigns with the paid use of the PHF stars to help promote their new games, within the emphasis being on the inclusion of women within the NHL 23 to 26 games. PHF, through the duration of the sponsorship, will allow a space for EA to be represented during commercial breaks of their live broadcast games, as well as promotions for their upcoming events or new games. The team within EA Sports will be responsible for arranging all these promotional activities with the PHF players and payment of all these promotions. Essentially, it will create more jobs within EA by having this done, by having an entirely separate division that will be responsible for the inclusion of not only how the women are included within their games, but also how the promotional campaigns are done and any other sponsorship deals that could arise through the PHF. By giving more exposure to the star players of the PHF, it'll allow them to generate more associated likeness to their name, which of course will allow them to create money off separate brand deals. By having that interest within the women's stars and creating other brand deals, it gets the league as a whole more well known. And by creating the league as a whole more well known, it allows them to create a greater revenue source and overall awareness to grow their game in the future. So in conclusion, the most important part of the deal is the fact that it's just beneficial for both companies to expand into their current and into new markets. EA will be allowed or be able to bolster their reputation through the likeness of PHF players and show that inclusion of women within sport. The PHF will be able to generate a wider market reach through EA's games and will also expand their audience for viewership through subscription services within the EA NHL 23 to 26. An overall estimation is about a 25% increase for revenues in EA NHL games, which currently sit at about 900 million over the past several years. So the idea would be over this term, a 25% increase from that 900 million during that 4-year term. So a big part of that would be the subscription, as new demographics would be purchasing the game, as well as the inclusion of PHF players will obviously open up more to the women demographic and younger demographic that care more about the inclusion of women within sport. And a desired increase for the PHF would be about 100%, basically doubling their revenue through more viewership, as well as through advertising through EA's campaigns. And by having their PHF stars within the game and creating other brand deals off their likeness, it will in turn, like I said, create more of an awareness of these players. And by creating more of an awareness of these star players, it will create a better awareness and excitement about the PHF as a whole. Thank you for listening.